Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. It's sponsored by LiquidPlanner, and the topic is change management in manufacturing. And our guests today are Liz Pearce and Phil Potkowski, and they're going to give a presentation of about 30-40 minutes or so, and then we're going to do a Q&A at the end, so please save your questions, and I'll be running around with the microphone, and feel free to ask questions. So with that, I'll bring Liz and Phil on the stage. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Liz Pearce, I'm the CEO of LiquidPlanner. Oh, Philip's behind me. He's very tall.
Hello, my name is Philip Potkowski. I'm with P3.
So if you have spent any time on the expo floor today, you've probably come across a lot of exciting innovations and ideas and things you might want to bring back to your organization back at home. But if someone said to you today, okay, congratulations, you're in charge of pushing this through into the organization. Go ahead and do it. How confident would you be that you had the resources, the time, the support to make that change happen? Yes? Or are you going to be the bad guy who's making everybody switch everything that they're doing all the time?
And then in addition, if you take one of these innovations that you see here back into your home organization, how confident would you be that the analysis and the due diligence has been done correctly to consider how does it affect your product portfolio, how does it affect your processes, your clients, and ultimately the culture of your organization. So these are quite some big challenges and questions that need to be discussed when we're talking about change management in the manufacturing environment. And that's what we'll focus on today.
Yeah.
My name is Phil Potkowski. I'm managing partner with P3. We're a global consulting company focusing specifically on change management for manufacturing companies.
And I'm Liz Pearce, I'm the CEO of LiquidPlanner. Our software helps people manage change. So you are executing projects, you're adapting to changes in your business, resources are coming on and off. You need a plan that helps you see the state of the world and work against that. So we think about change management all day, every day. This is our first time presenting together, our first time doing a joint speech. So bear with us as we make the handoffs. A lot of good material to cover. Oh, you're clicking.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So as we look at everything that is available to us to improve our businesses, it may seem somewhat of a fantasy to be able to just like go home, plop this new thing in, everything is going to work perfectly, business continues as usual. The reality for a lot of you is probably that you're fairly mired in the old way of doing things, old mentalities, legacy systems, things that are holding you back from making a change. And so why is change scary? The Standish Group did a study that showed 2/3 of projects that we take on fail to deliver on time, on budget, or on scope. And of the projects that are actually successful, only 1/4 of those gains are sustained over time. So we have good reason to be trepidatious about the things we take on in our organizations. If we fail trying to roll something new out, that's our reputation at stake. However, the flip side, the idea of not changing is also scary. It has its own set of risks. We know that if we kick the can down the road and say, oh, we'll implement that next year, we probably have a nagging voice in our head that says, my competitor is probably doing this right now. And so what kind of challenges is our business going to face ultimately if we don't take the brave step of innovating in our companies? Has anybody read Good to Great? Or has anybody been told to read Good to Great? Yeah. So this is one of the most popular business books of our time. And Jim Collins in this book studied 11 companies that were facing mediocrity. And he looked at how they all transformed into what he considered great companies, companies that were outperforming the market compared to their peers, and what were the qualities that they had that were able to make them successful. And it was the author of Freakonomics who identified the fact that after the publication of the book, all of the companies, with the exception of one, underperformed the S&P 500. So somewhere along the line, the things that made them great did not sustain that greatness over time. They have to continue to evolve.
And if I may interrupt, so the one company that outperformed still It's a company, Nucor. We should be familiar with the company, steel manufacturing company. And if you look at the details, how they continuously outperformed with some really drastic measures. So they at one point accepted a turnover rate of 50% in order to keep their workforce up to date. And these kind of measures that they brought up really fostered this continuous success of their organization.
So if the companies that Jim Collins was able to identify as great didn't meet market expectations, what if we broaden the net a little bit? So looking at the Fortune 1000 companies, there was a study recently published in Forbes that said 70% of the Fortune 1000 companies turn over every decade. 70% of those companies no longer exist or are no longer part of that group 10 years later. So is it just that they're too large? Are they suffering under their own weight? Or is there more to it? So if we look a little further, we can see that actually even if you go further down the stack, 50% of all publicly traded companies will no longer exist after 10 years. So we get to the point where business transformation is really a survival skill. It's critical for us to evolve our businesses to keep pace with what's going on in the market, to respond and to improve.
Great, thank you, Liz.
Oh yeah, Philip has a great example. Philip, if you can't tell, Philip is from the great country of Germany, grew up in Stuttgart, and we found an example of a company that did this well right in Philip's backyard.
Right, the company that I want to talk about that has mastered change management over a long period of time, throughout very difficult times at times, it's called Webasto, and we probably know them. And I'll talk more about the company, but they were founded as Esslinger Wire and Iron Works. Company founded in 1901 in Esslingen, which is a small suburb of Stuttgart. When they were founded, they focused on stamped parts, household appliances for the first couple years. But Mr. Bayer, who was the CEO back then, quickly realized that there's more potential to his company. And in 1908, that's approximately when the bicycle trend took off in Europe. So there was a huge demand for bicycles to get from A to B. So immediately they turned around and started manufacturing wheels, pedals, frames, all kind of pieces and parts that you need for bicycles. And they were quite successful for that. But again, in 1920, when the automotive industry took off and the local OEMs such as Mercedes, Porsche, BMW and whatnot, once they were looking for more qualified suppliers, they pivoted again and started producing automotive parts. So Esslinger Wire and Iron Works has been very adaptive to change early on, and they were able to foster this mentality in their culture. And that led them, in addition with innovation, to their peak product. Innovation was for Mr. Bayer very important, and he was always pushing for innovation and improving processes and looking for new things. And he accomplished the first sunroof that he launched in 1932. Webasto is now known for roof systems for vehicles. So if you own a convertible, if you have been in a convertible, or you have one in your garage at home, you most likely have a system from Webasto in this vehicle. Until today, Webasto is the leader when it comes to roof systems for the automotive industry. So very strong success story, and the company kept on growing, and of course globalization kicked in and whatnot. And in 1974 they actually entered the United States, and that's when things changed. 1974 things were good. The company was growing also in the United States. There was a lot of business with the local OEMs, the big three and whatnot. But early this century, with oil crisis and also the financial crisis, Webasto started losing money.
They weren't alone.
They were not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it started slowly. First year was 5 million revenue down, then 20 million, and then it hit 60 million, and then the management got heavily concerned and engaged. And they actually got to the point where they were debating whether they should pull out of the US market or whether they should stay in the US market. But Webasto, having this culture of change management, was able to counter this downward trend. Management got involved, they put teams in place, looked at, okay, what are the root causes? And they were basically I'm not going to go too deep into it, but there were basically 3 root causes. In good times, Webasto bought a lot of business, meaning they went in with low profit margins, and then as the client relationship was established, optimized their profit margins, and then basically tried to get business up that way and to make money. That didn't work during bad times when the OEMs were pushing pressure on the suppliers and whatnot. So suddenly they were losing money from that perspective. Also, the organization was very much set up in silos. So manufacturing, development, all these different product planning, marketing, all these different departments were not working together as one operation. And this trickled down into the operations. So customers started to get confused, were not happy, the company was slow, not nimble, and that overall didn't help. The management team and a lot of the employees realized that, and because there was no solid plan in place on how to counteract and get the company, the US operations of Webasto out of this dilemma, they started leaving. So on top of that, that didn't help at all. Thankfully, Webasto was able to turn around. Put a bunch of measures in place, stabilize, they put a strategy in place, action plan, work together with the workforce, and step by step work their way out of it. Soon, in 2014, they were again #1 in the US market with 36% of market share. And that is a truly amazing result if you think this through in turning the company around in a couple years only.
So sometimes if there's a crisis, it actually creates an opportunity. People are maybe more open to the idea of change when things are going wrong. They're looking for solutions to the problem. Even if your business is not in the midst of a crisis, if there is a culture of continuous improvement, of lean manufacturing, if people are starting to be interested in Six Sigma or other methodologies, those may be the right people to help you, as maybe you're a maverick in your organization, you're one of the change makers, to go in and find that right opening, that right time, that right moment to make the change. So obviously we're way past sunroofs now. We have some much bigger innovations happening in our industry. Philip's going to talk about a few of those that you've probably already heard a lot about today, and we'll continue to hear more about over time.
Yes, thank you, Liz. So one topic that I want to focus on is information overflow and the pure amount of information that our organizations, our employees, and us are getting on a daily basis. Let's take a look at this chart, and I'll explain this. In 1900, it took about 100 years to double the information that was available to the employees and also to the company owners and to the management. It took about 100 years to double the information. In the 40s and 50s, this went down to about 25 years. Currently, our studies have identified that it takes about a year, maybe a little bit more, for the information that is available to all of us to double. We're expecting that soon we'll be in a position where information will double twice a day. That's drastic. Okay? Imagine, how do you then, in such a situation, and your employees and your organization, analyze, first of all this data that's out there and the information that's out there?
Most of us can't even deal with our email doubling in the time that we're sitting in this session.
Right, we're joking about if you go these days on vacation for a week, your email inbox is full. This is not going to get any easier. So for us, this really comes down to how do we quickly ensure that we get the right information and make the right decisions. And that is a major change that everybody of us is confronted with, every organization, and that everybody has to deal with. There's no, we haven't found a way around it, and I don't think there is. Now, of course, this is mostly doesn't. Okay. So now we need the next slide.
Getting some help from the back.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So while we're waiting for some tech support to get the next slide, perfect. Internet of Things. Most of this is triggered by the Internet of Things, a trend that is happening to all of us, where much more data is coming via the different apps, the different software programs, solutions that are out there. So from our side, the question comes down to how do we manage all this data that comes down there? And I would like to pick an industry and an example that I think has huge upside on this situation. Let's take a look at the automotive industry. In the automotive industry, such as other industries, connectivity is getting more and more relevant. If you came here in a rental car, or your personal vehicle at home, you probably have some kind of a telematics system. Ford Sync, GM OnStar, Hyundai BlueLink, Toyota Entune, you're familiar with all these systems. Now, for us as a user of the vehicle, there's some nice benefits to having these systems in place. But for the OEM and the vehicle manufacturer, there's a huge upside to that. Because not only is data going into the vehicle, if we are sitting there as a driver and we want to listen to Pandora or we want to get a new route on our maps, a lot of information is also going out of the vehicle. Very easy, classifiable. There's information about the vehicle, oil temperature, sensors in the vehicle that tell us, okay, what's the pressure of the tire. But we also get, as a manufacturer for vehicles, we get information on driving behavior. Yeah, where has this, with GPS systems, where has this vehicle been parked overnight? What's happening? So all this information currently we experience is going into so-called data lakes, terabytes of data. Managing this data and being able to interpret this data and then making educated, fact-based decisions in order to improve the product at the end of the day for the end user, that is a key to success. So whichever OEM, whether it's Mercedes, Toyota, Ford, or whoever, or Tesla, manages this first, has a big competitive advantage over the others in making a better product for the end user or a more customized product. So this is a great example where on the one side we have a huge challenge, the information overflow and all this data available, but if addressed correctly, this can be turned into a major advantage, and that's what we consider a big benefit here. Second example I'd like to quickly touch on is 3D printing. You might think now, oh, well, what a big deal. Well, 2 years ago, we know that 30% of the companies represented at the WESTEC were playing around with the idea, looking into it. At this point in time, we know that 2/3 of the companies presenting and the participants are actively working on 3D printing for their manufacturing operations. We all know the upsides of 3D printing, whether it's for parts, tooling, or whatever. But that is a great example where you have traditional processes, manufacturing processes, that have been proven over years, and suddenly you come in with a technology that is highly disruptive. If this is implemented correctly, again, can be a major upside. If not, then there can be a problem. We're working with a joint project, LiquidPlanner and P3, with a company, a manufacturer, and on 3D printing for tooling, so not for parts, for tooling. And first results show that there's a 50% price reduction, cost reduction, and a 50% reduction in manufacturing time. These are some hard facts, and that is quite significant. If we're able to implement this solution correctly, then this is a major competitive advantage.
So probably 2 years ago, when people started having conversations about 3D printing in their organization, the people who were back behind their desks were saying, why would we implement 3D printing? We've always done it this way. It's working just fine. We're shipping product. Everything's all good. And recent developments in neuroscience have proven that as human beings, we are hardwired to reject new information. Did anybody think, no, I'm not?
Not me.
It's true, though. And it's because change often represents a threat to our own existence. What if we can't keep up? What if we don't have the skills we need to be able to adapt to the change? And change often impacts the people in our organizations that are the ones out there getting their hands dirty. And if we, as managers and leaders, don't set them up for success, we can face some negative consequences. A term that we've been hearing a lot in the work that we do with all kinds of different companies is this idea of change saturation. The BPM Institute did a study recently that showed that only 1/3 of people feel that they're overwhelmed by change, but only 20% of people report that they have the ability to take on more. And probably there are more than 1 in 5 of you that are planning to go back and suggest more changes for your organization. But people aren't necessarily ready to receive those changes. And so some of the symptoms that you might see in your organization when you reach that point of change saturation, maybe you even have them yourself: frustration, fatigue, apathy, disconnectedness. Whether people are actively or passively resisting new changes to the organization, you're going to see symptoms of this if you're not going about implementing changes thoughtfully. And we oftentimes end up in a situation where we're just fighting fires, we're just reacting. We are not proactively making decisions. So I just talked about the people who are tasked with implementing the changes on the ground. On the other side of the coin are executives who are facing a different set of pressures. They have customers, investors, public markets, competitors, breathing down their neck, huge top line and bottom line expectations. And their reaction to those pressures is to tell middle management, just get it done. I don't care how you do it, just make it happen. And it's make it happen while you're keeping the existing business running. So it is not properly recognizing the constraints of the organization, whether they're financial, resource-based, cultural, time. Those constraints exist. In project management, we call it the iron triangle. Quality, time, or cost. One of those has to give. When we take on new initiatives in our business, something has to get pushed out. Something has to change in the existing set of work that's being proposed and delivered. So our job is to make the best possible decisions within the constraints. Back in 1991, Tim Noster of the Enterprise Group introduced a framework for managing complex change that is still very relevant 30 years later. And it offers a set of 5 ingredients for success in managing change that I've seen be very helpful for organizations that we've worked with at LiquidPlanner. Now, bear in mind that though a lot of us came up in an engineering track where we focus on our hard skills, our technical skills, what's required to be successful in implementing change is oftentimes more of the soft skills. The first thing that has to be in place is vision and a communication of that vision. What does the end game look like? What are we trying to get to for our business? What does success look like? And it's not just a one-time thing. You don't just say, here's the vision, okay, go off and have fun. You have to reinforce that vision over time. The next thing is skills. Do you need to retrain your team in order to take on the change? Do you need to bring in new skills from the outside to help your organization through? The skills have to be there, or the change won't be successful. The next one gets a little tricky. That's incentives. How do the people who are tasked with implementing the change benefit from the change itself? Can you articulate that benefit for them? Can you answer for each person involved, what's in it for me? The next is resources. Those resources could come in the form of additional people, of time to do the work, of new equipment. The resources have to be in place. And the last one is my personal favorite as a project manager. You have to have an action plan. So you have to be clear about the steps that you're going to take to implement the change, who owns those different steps, who's accountable. And if any one of these are missing, you're going to start to hear and see things in your organization that indicate that something's not going smoothly. So if we start looking down the line, if you aren't articulating the vision, people are going to be confused. Why are we doing this? You may not even hear this directly. This may be a conversation that's happening at the water cooler or that you get wind of. People aren't bought in. If you're missing skills, there will be anxiety in your workforce. People will feel that perhaps their job is in jeopardy. That creates fear, and that can, that also impacts your culture. Without the proper incentives, you're going to get resistance. So maybe somebody just can't make the meeting about the change. They don't have time to do it. Oh, they've been pulled off on something else. Again, whether it's subtle or direct, you're going to meet resistance from people who don't feel like they understand why they should bother making the change. All of us have probably experienced an unfunded mandate at some point, being asked to do something without being given the resources to make it happen, and that leads to frustration. A lot of times that leads to employee attrition. And then lastly, if you don't have a plan, you'll wind up spinning your wheels. This directly ties to the stat I mentioned at the beginning of the program. 2/3 of projects fail to complete on time. So, false starts are part of the game if you don't have that plan in place. So Philip and I have both been lucky to sit side by side with some organizations that have actually followed this framework and have been successful in implementing different types of changes. It's not always about some big sweeping innovation in the market. Sometimes it's about basic processes that are not being well managed in your organization. So we have some examples of both of those things to share today.
Yeah, perfect. And so we'll go over 4 examples. I'll cover the first 2, and then Liz does cover the second 2. And I'll start out with this example. This was project examples where we walked into a project with a manufacturer that was manufacturing sensors, different typical sensors. For us, the goal when we walked in there was a change management project, was to understand why inventory is extremely high, and customers at that point seemed to be unhappy because lead times were too long. At that point, 3 to 4 lead times was classified as being too long, and we needed to discuss this and act on this. So we had a number of activities and initiatives. We approached the situation and we were able to turn it around and recover, reducing inventory by 75%, which was significant, and lead time down to 1 day. The key message that I want to share here is to the success of these results were twofold. Following the framework that Liz just explained, it was crucial at the beginning to clarify the vision. Why are we doing this? At the end of the day, this only worked by having the support of the employees and the middle management. So the first step was to define clearly, okay, what is our intention? What is our goals? Why are we doing this? There was a clear message that we over and over 7, 8, 9, 10 times had to discuss and communicate to the workforce. As soon as we received buy-in from the workforce and the middle management, suddenly things started moving. And we were able to implement the action plan jointly. We didn't face any resistance, and that was key to success. So for this example, having a clear vision, the clear why, supported at the end of the day the action plan, and that was key. Second topic I want to talk about is digital manufacturing for an assembly plant. So what happened here is we entered this account, and there was a lot of turmoil. It was a major program that we were asked to support. The program when we joined was in the high red. Program was scheduled for 5 years. We were in year number 4, and there was a lot of issues. Customers were not happy. The teamwork burned out. A lot of the employees already left or were on their way out. Management didn't interact very well with each other. There was silos clearly being established. So overall, not a good situation that you want to be in. However, this company had a vast array of data. It was one of these automotive companies that I was talking about earlier. Our first step was to understand, okay, read the data and analyze the data so that we can make unbiased, fact-based decision proposals. Once we understood the situation based on and were able to analyze this data, we walked in with a very different perspective than what we have heard and seen on reports up till then. That put us in a position to get a much clearer focus and action plan in place, and ultimately we were able to launch in time. Cost was still a little higher, but at least we were able to launch in time and meet customer expectations, and it was key at this point.
One of the customers that I have been inspired by is one that is in the high temperature materials space. And they really prided themselves on having a very smooth manufacturing process. The minute a product went into production till the time it came off, very, very clean. They had implemented theory of constraints. They used drum buffer rope. They were kind of at the top of their class in terms of their approach to manufacturing. But what was suffering in the business was everything, leading up to manufacturing. From the time a customer submitted an order until the time it actually went into production was sometimes, 4 weeks, where people are trying to figure out what resources are available, how long is it going to take, what tooling do we need. There was mass confusion, paper flying around, people having hallway conversations. the opposite of the smoothness they had achieved within manufacturing. And so they set about to achieve that same level of efficiency pre-manufacturing using the same theory, acknowledging the constraints, being clear on priorities, and resolving bottlenecks. They had a dedicated resource to manage this. They really felt that the impact of the business ultimately of customers being dissatisfied would hurt them, and so they funded this project. And they set a timeline for themselves. 60 days to actually get data into the system, to roll it out, to begin templatizing their process and their workflow, and to institute a daily stand-up where everybody who was involved in setting those estimates and quotes to customers met on a daily basis to resolve those issues. And if you can show the outcomes of that, before this process started, every day they received 10 to 15 calls, inbound calls from customers saying, "Where is my order?" So they were not proactively giving that information, and they weren't delivering on time. They got that call number down to 0. They're now proactively communicating when orders will be shipping, and they're 90% accurate on their delivery times. So a dramatic transformation, applying some of what they had done on manufacturing to pre-manufacturing. It was a change for the company, but it was very successful. Another company that I think is really interesting is in the industrial machine vision space. They use artificial intelligence to improve their products for their customers. And their core value as a company is around innovation and invention. And they accept the disorder and the uncertainty of that mentality. However, as they grew, their success caused growth, and that growth caused more pain from the lack of process and lack of a system to manage the work. And so they knew they had to get some discipline and some tracking and accountability on the work, but they didn't want to sacrifice that spirit of invention, that ability to live with uncertainty and to discover. So they found a system that enabled them to use ranged estimates to manage things, to account for that uncertainty in the work that they do. They incented their team to participate by promising that at the end of this there'd be less firefighting, there'd be less randomization, there'd be less time in status meetings, where people are not doing what they were hired to do, they're reporting on the work itself. And key to their success was that the executive stakeholders in the business were fully in support of this new process. And it became something that was expected of the team. And now the business leaders are working together better, the customers are more satisfied, and they're still able to be inventive, even while also having that element of discipline.
Okay, thank you, Liz. So these were 4 examples where we have now seen what happens if one of these 5 components is not in place for success. I want to talk a little bit, and we're going to wrap up the presentation now. So as we understand, there's an old way of doing things. I've always done it like this. We have always manufactured parts and pieces like this. And there's a new way. Disruption can be from an external threat, can be in order to keep up with competition, can be in a disruptive technology. These things we cannot avoid. It's very hard for us to just put our blinds on and say, okay, we ignore this, we just continue. Our company most likely won't be able to continue in a sustainable way. So we'll probably most likely go the new way. And there's a change. And change is complicated, in some cases painful. It's inevitable and invaluable. Change can also be a huge opportunity. And for us, thinking about walking the hall here and seeing all the new technology and innovation and the topics here, we're thinking if you take these topics back into your organization and you find a solution that you think, okay, this is interesting, I'd like to discuss it with management or with my employees back in my home organization, and I would like to implement it. Please, we're all aware there's some change management coming along with it, and there's some change required. So from our side, the ask is please include us in this discussion. I think we have some good stories to share and some key lessons learned, and we'll be very happy to share with you our perspective on introducing a new technology in existing processes or whatnot. if we successfully are able to foster a culture of change, the results can be very strong.
Yeah, I think if on the flip side, we're not aware of the implications of our actions when it comes to rolling out something new in our organization, the flip side is that the wind can be in your face. Just yesterday, we announced at this conference a partnership between LiquidPlanner and P3. What we found in working together is that we both, at our core, respect the fact that people are at the heart of successful change management. You also need the right business processes and the right tools to be successful. We're having a lot of great conversations already this week with organizations that are facing a range of different change management challenges from, my boss has been at this company for 50 years and he won't even hear of it, to my boss wants to do everything that you see here next week. And we feel that we can, together with our joint expertise, hopefully be a part of that conversation, and we welcome you to come by our booth. It's right over there, and continue the conversation.
At this point, we'd like to open it up for questions, if there's any questions.
Questions? Anybody? Questions? Anything they didn't cover?
How big of companies do you guys deal with? 50 employees, 200?
Yeah, we deal with companies of 5 to 10,000. Yeah, all ranges.
Yeah.
That's pretty broad. Who else?
Yeah, see, change, maybe to tag on to that, the topic of external threats, disruptive technology. Think about the Webasto example that I was giving. When the company started in 1901, it was a small company producing some stamp parts. Now it's a huge company. So the same thing applies for us here. We really work with companies that are in a startup mode, that ask us for advice on how to implement change, but all the way to big 3 automotive companies, big aviation companies, telecommunication, across the board.
I would say that the common thread with the companies that we work with, and a lot of times in a larger company, it may be a department that's trying to work better as a unit, is that they are trying to grow. They're doing something highly innovative that's very complex, and that involves a lot of people to get that product off the ground. And so, that's a unique set of challenges. It's different than just following a process. There's a lot of complexity and uncertainty, and so in the old days, it was Microsoft project or nothing. The market has evolved, and we're trying to help organizations be more responsive to what's going on in their business.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, we have one in front.
What is your shortest and longest engagement that you have done?
So the question was, what is the shortest and what is the longest engagement that we have worked on? Would you want
Probably about a year is the longest partnership.
So I think that makes sense. About
for us jointly. For you, for P3, you're probably going on decades, right?
So in the cooperation that we have established, we have the longest was 1 year. For P3 side, I can say that project lasts from quick checks that are anywhere from 3 to 5 days, all the way to multi-year project engagements. And on the LiquidPlanner side?
Yeah, I think for us, change is a way of life. And so we're typically not just coming in for one project, start and end. We're typically helping people manage a portfolio of projects over time. So we've been around for 10 years. We have customers that are still with us from year 1.
Yeah. I think there was another question in front.
Hello, my name is DJ. I'm here on behalf of VSP Global. Thank you for the great presentation. Every bit of it was pretty much relatable. The question I have for you is actually twofold. First is when companies identify and relate with the aspect of change, and they want to bring in change, but they're so accustomed to the traditional way of working with no processes or old obsolete ways of working, it's tricky to bring in change and implement it. I mean, you can talk about change, but you don't want to really implement it because you feel threat around it. So how do you tackle something like that? And the second fold of thing is that I personally am an engineer and I have a very analytical way of working. But I work with a lot of designers, and they tend to relate a lot of their creativity to abstractness and lack of systems because that's how they feel more comfortable. So how do you relate, or how would you solve a problem like that?
I'll take that one, Philip,
Yeah.
for a first pass. What we've seen a lot of success with is when a small group within the organization takes the first swing and proves the success and actually has something to show as an example of what the world will look like for everyone else if they too adopt the change. So rather than just planting a flag in the ground and saying, this is the way, it's going to happen next week, get ready, whether you like it or not, show success. Show that it is not burdensome. Show that there are benefits to people who are willing to take it on. So that's been, I think, the biggest lesson learned for me, is that people really respond to other people's success. They want a piece of that success as well. I think for any group of people, you'll have a spectrum of those that are willing to track, to work within a process or a system, and those that resist it. And I think there's a point in the continuum where you can get the bulk of those folks using the system, and then maybe there is some mechanism, maybe there's someone who is tasked with doing the updates on behalf of the people that just won't, but they still are adding value to the organization. There's a combination of carrot and stick, right? If you can offer them something for complying and reward them in some way for doing that thing that is a tax to them, that's good. Alternately, if you can say, you know what, we really need you to do this, it's part of your job requirement. So there are different ways of handling it. It just depends on the culture of your team and really how the executive stakeholders feel about it, whether they're willing to stick their neck out and say, this is the way it's going to be done.
So you guys have handled a project like that in the past, where you've had creative teams kind of working with engineers and that kind of complex and
Sure, yeah. I mean, we're like project doctors. We've seen it all. Like, we have seen every combination of people who are willing and people who resist. And there's usually a way for the people that really care about the outcome to make it happen.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody else I missed? Well, thanks to Liz Pearce and Philip Potkowski for a great presentation, and thanks to LiquidPlanner for sponsoring today's
you.
Lunch and Learn. Thanks, guys.